Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, participants, and welcome to our very last module of our Access Control crash course destined to system integrators. Today we're talking about a workflow-based approach to managing access. Thus far, we've covered everything from credential to head-end software and everything in between, like inputs and outputs, electronic logs, controllers, and communications. Today, we're going to answer the question about what solution can you provide to customers that are already on Security Center Synergis. Note that today we're greeting an even broader audience of system integrators, as some registrants chose to join the crash course the last week and today, covering only modules 5 to 6. Note that the final exam is comprehensive, covering modules from 1 to 6 inclusively. So, as a word of caution to those that are just joining us today, I encourage you to at least review or glance through these slides from modules 1 to 6 of our resources page. The link will be sent out after today's webinar. We'll be talking a little bit more about the final exam in more detail at the end of today's module. And if you think of a question during today's module, ask right away by using the questions dialog box in the GoToWebinar interface, the right-hand side of your screen. We have a team of colleagues here monitoring your questions, and a brief question and answer period will follow after today's module. To introduce myself, my name is Derek Arcuri, and I'll be your host for today's module. I'm the Product Marketing Manager with a core focus on access control and identity management at Genetec, and I'm joined by Stéphane Belair, the Commercial Manager for Identity Management at Genetec. Stéphane will be monitoring questions as they come in. And if you haven't already, please join our LinkedIn group to ask questions, share material, and collaborate with classmates. The sign-up link is available in the presentation that will be made available after today's module. Note that today's module is being recorded and will be made available on our resources page. And for a brief recap from Module 5, we started off with the notion of enabling your customers to buy from you by sizing up the cost of inaction, showing customers that the pain of same is greater than the pain of change. So for when customers are ready for their migration, we walked through step-by-step recommendations for a successful migration. We then introduced a more efficient way to own, deploy, and maintain access control. It's what we call access control as a service, where there are fewer components to deploy and to maintain in your customer's system. We then ended off the module with physical and cyber risks to an access control system, along with recommendations on what you can do to harden your customer's system after it has been deployed. So after today's webinar, you'll get a better feel for some trends that are shaping the access control landscape, forcing customers to rethink their security strategy. We'll introduce a different approach to managing access. We'll talk about the identity and access management category. We'll talk about how together we can fill the gap in the market, and then we'll end off with the target industries or vertical markets with high adoption expectations. So, in talking with our customers, with analysts, and with journalists, we've seen the access control landscape evolve over the years, and you might have seen them as well out in the field. So, one trend you might be seeing is the increase of stringent regulations that impact the way your customers work, forcing them to look for different ways to comply, enforce policies, and standardize across sites. One example is the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, that affects how organizations manage the identities of European citizens. Failing to comply comes with hefty, steep fines. Utility providers can also be fined by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, also known as NERC, a U.S. regulator, for failing to remove access rights from identities that no longer are associated with the company. Another trend we're hearing more about is the rise of insider threats. Bigger security risks are coming from within the organization. In the 2016 Cybersecurity Intelligence Index, IBM found that 60% of all attacks were carried out by insiders. Of these attacks, 3/4 involved malicious intent, and 1/4 involved inadvertent actors, so not really knowing that they were causing harm. IBM Security Research also found that healthcare, manufacturing, and financial services are the top three industries under attack due to the personal data, access to personal data, intellectual property, and physical inventory, along with massive financial assets. Whether intentional or malicious, internal cardholders always have the advantage of knowing the internal security vulnerabilities, putting your customers in a unique advantage to cause harm to the organization. And finally, we're seeing right from within and outside our industry a surge in mergers and acquisitions that lead to a growing interconnectivity. As customers expand, merge access control systems, or add new ones, access rights become increasingly complex, especially when your customers are driven to move their cardholders onto a one card solution, to consolidate systems, and to find new efficiencies to improve their day to day operations. Our customers are looking for efficiencies because of the overwhelming piecemeal or integrated approach to security. One of the most forgotten elements with growing system complexity is how it impacts operators' efficiency or their effectiveness. As organizations grow, so does managing a greater number of cardholders, areas, and access rights. The administrative processes, like dealing with cardholders that forgot their card at home, locked themselves out of their premises, that maybe worked for smaller organizations but no longer work for the larger organizations. The market is looking for intuitive solutions that don't overwhelm operators. These solutions reduce overdependence on operators so that they can respond to emerging threats and incidents. It's also cumbersome to enforce security policies across sites and keep them up to date. The manual approach to enforcing policies, like procedures for managing cardholders with lost credentials or procedures for making special access requests, can be frankly challenging to enforce, especially with multiple remote sites. Lastly, finding the right balance between restricting access, lowering risk, and ensuring convenience is a tough balance to strike. At the extreme, everyone has access everywhere because it's more convenient to give all cardholders 24-hour access to all areas. Convenience has always been a compromise to security, and vice versa. So let me explain how your customer's access control system become complex over time, taking you back several years ago when your customer deployed their access control system based on the needs that they had at the time. They chose that system based on traditional needs to secure doors, based on the threats that they saw at the time, and based on the budget that they had allocated at the time. But your customer's organization continues to evolve over time. Many corporations often acquire smaller companies to grow or expand into new markets or geographic regions. However, one consequence of this is that they inherit the company's pre-existing access control infrastructure. In many cases, it's simpler and more cost-effective to continue using the pre-existing system rather than replacing it or upgrading it. More cardholders, new access rights, and ever-changing security policies emerge, making it challenging to remain consistent and compliant. So workarounds begin to emerge, and cardholders are now expected to carry multiple cards to get from site to site. Your customer starts to see inconsistent policies that begin to emerge. As policies evolve, they run across unused cards, too many access rules, outdated rights, and security gaps. The access control databases become polluted over time, especially when disparate systems can't talk to each other, therefore duplicating efforts and data. With compliance top of mind, your customer starts assessing a variety of options, but usually focus on existing access control suppliers. They invest in a new security system or hire more staff, but the root problem goes unnoticed. And it goes unnoticed because access control alone is really only half of the equation. Access control today is about managing doors, cardholders, and credentials. You run reports, you manage alarms, you control access. Access control systems were never designed to automate access rights management or help ensure compliance, creating a gap in the market as companies evolve. So, finding the right balance between restricting access, lowering risk, and ensuring convenience is a tough balance to strike because there's no efficient, consistent way to manage access rights and automate the process. Again, at the extreme, everyone has access everywhere. Imagine if a contractor required access to the HVAC closet after hours, say at 4 a.m. in the morning. For many organizations, they'll give that contractor 24-hour access to that area just in case it's needed because they don't have a badge office or reception that is open after hours to process the contractor's access request. As a result, the organization is increasing their overall risk. So, to this day, access control is about managing cardholders, credentials, and doors, but this is not how our customers work in many segments of the market. They have policies to follow, they set up procedures, regulations that they need to comply with, and so on. Yet, access control solutions put all that work on the end user, and we want to make it easier for them. So, rather than managing cardholders' access rights and credentials, we're proposing relying on identities, attributes, and codified policies. Workflows guide the implementation of daily activities. Let me explain what all this means. So, an identity is much more than a profile of a cardholder. It's really an employee's, a contractor's, or visitor's unique digital profile. It can be permanent for employees, semi-permanent for contractors, and temporary for guests. An identity interacts across many security and business systems and might comprise of, say, a Windows user in Active Directory, an employee in the payroll and human resources system, a sales manager in the CRM and quoting tool, and also a cardholder in the physical access control system. An identity is also comprised of various attributes or characteristics. Examples include department, location, roles, seniority, training certificates, and security clearances. Many of these attributes change over time as they evolve naturally, so should the access rights. So, a better approach relies on policies, on rules that automatically assign rights to identities, to people, based on attributes, based on traits and characteristics. From admitting visitors to onboarding and offboarding employees and contractors, identities follow a life cycle that consists of the following. Firstly, the identity creation, like when a contractor starts or when a visitor is admitted to the organization. Next is the access provisioning based on the role and the attributes assigned to the identity. Next is the identity evolution, like for example promotions and as roles change that lead to different access provisioned. And finally, access termination when an employee leaves the organization or when a visitor finishes with their meeting. So let's think differently about managing access. Every day, employees, contractors, and visitors rely on an access control system to allow them entry to the areas they need. So why limit the ability to make access requests, make these access changes to only security operators or to IT staff? In most cases, when an identity needs to request a change, they have to visit the badge office or receptionist, further delaying the process. Operators don't know who should always have access at all times, so they might have to guess. Large multinational corporations possessing a portfolio of sites with a wide variety of different access control systems that are managed locally typically utilize an access control list model for credential management. This means that access control model is based upon a simple list of authorized subjects for different access points, different doors at specific times and dates. Because of the existence of decentralized access control management across sites, if credentials are needed for a particular site, they usually have to be approved and issued at that location. This is usually conducted by security professional or in many cases a receptionist due to the abundance when compared to the former. This situation possesses a banquet of inefficiencies and potential vulnerabilities for security personnel and human resources staff. For example, the process for an employee that wants to gain temporary access to a new site would be as follows. The employee needs access to another building. That employee then has to find out who the security operator is for that building, send an email or make a telephone call. The employee then contacts security operator to apply for access. This sometimes requires filling out a form. The form then needs to be signed by the operating manager for that building and potentially also the employee's manager. And then once permission is granted, the employees can receive their credentials. As the size and number of sites in a growing enterprise, the complexity of this process increases, and so does the possibility of delays of one of those steps. So how does all of this scale when your customers are managing thousands of identities? For example, employees sometimes go on maternity leave, and information on who is responsible for certain areas may not be available or may have changed. Vulnerabilities can also arise if employees are given incorrect access rights or permanent access rights when they only require temporary access rights. In their day-to-day jobs, operators often make exceptions in their organizational physical security access control rights and rules. Onboarding and offboarding are common moments in the identity lifecycle when an operator might not know the right process and on-step solutions are applied. Or these workarounds are applied. These small improvisations are generally made by individual operators and are not centrally managed. Over time, these policy workarounds can mount, creating security gaps. So, how do you ensure that consistency and audit exceptions for your customers? An access control system will only show that an operator gave access or granted access to a secure area without explaining any of the context behind why the access was required in the first place and why it was ultimately granted. And a manual approach to managing access policies can put a strain on operations teams and draw focus from their core responsibility of protecting people and assets. This can compromise efficiency, lead to human error, and increase the chance of security breaches. Organizations often address the problem of an overloaded team by hiring more personnel, but this is only masking the underlying inefficiency of the manual system and increases overheads. So, how efficient is that approach moving forward? Now, these challenges that I brought up are addressed by physical identity and access management systems. For many, this may be a new term. For others, you may have heard of identity and access management from the IT world, so let me explain. So physical identity and access management solutions provide unified identity management capabilities across all IT applications, physical security systems, and the network. These systems allow end users to centrally manage the life cycle of identities for anybody that comes into contact with the company, including employees, clients, contractors, suppliers, and so on. This includes the ability to deploy identities, credentials, as well as assign access rights into one or more vendor-independent physical access control systems. The system connects to the access control environment and other business systems and automatically assigns access rights to restricted areas based on the corporate policies that are organized by the end user, by the customer. Physical identity and access management systems were born out of the necessity for large enterprise users of access control to be able to unify credential management among multiple sites across different locations where they may also potentially be using different access control hardware. And if you weren't aware, physical identity and access management categories expected to boom. The American, European, and Middle Eastern PIAM, physical identity and access management market revenues totaled 136 million US dollars in 2016, but is forecasted to grow at a whopping compound annual growth rate of 29.1%, all the way up to 489 million. That's almost a $500 million US dollars through 2021. So what's driving that growth? We think that it's because it helps organizations tackle system centralization challenges that we discussed before. It automates access rights management based on policies, workflows, as opposed to the manual coordination and guesswork. And it offers central auditing capabilities, increased accountability, which is a big driver for many regulated industries. But despite its relatively immature state, market growth will still be limited by poor awareness of the solution. But Genetec will be actively broadcasting our message later on this year, so I'd like to introduce you to the Genetec narrative. So Genetec Clear ID is our response to a growing market need for centralizing identity management and ultimately helping customers secure their premises without a compromise on the flow of people. So what is Genetec Clear ID? It's a self-service identity and access management system that connects to your customers' existing business systems and to Synergis. It standardizes and codifies your customers' security policies to simplify access rights management. And it ultimately makes your customers more efficient, more compliant, and more secure. Genetec Clear ID enables your customers to manage the identities of people across all of their locations. By standardizing and automating their security policies and ensuring authorized employees approve access requests, it heightens security without a compromise to operations and everyday activities within the facility. Through increased operational efficiency, they not only proactively protect their employees, their buildings, and their assets, but they're also better equipped to comply with internal and external regulations. So let me give you a few examples of how Clear ID would be used. Now, I do want to point out that Genetec Clear ID is not available today. We're looking at making the platform generally available in the second half of 2018. More information will be communicated in the coming months. So since Clear ID builds bridges with other systems that your customers are using, like Active Directory, like HR systems and payroll systems, along with ERP systems, the identity creation for how HR would onboard a new employee can start with whichever system. Then, based on your customer's policy, Clear ID triggers one or more workflows. It can assign the identity, the person, to a specific team. Then it would provision the identity's access rights. It would then enforce prerequisites for a specific area, like life and safety training required to access the warehouse, or perhaps it's a drug test that is required to be negative within 90 days, proof of a drug test being negative in 90 days. Then it assigns a credential to the identity. Then it produces the physical card and sends a notification when ready. And once all of that is done, access is provisioned in Synergis. So these automatic workflows replace the manual procedure required in onboarding a new employee. Onboarding and offboarding are common moments in an identity's life cycle. After all, when an employee is offboarded, they should no longer have access to the organization's secure areas. But sometimes an operator might not know the right process and workarounds are done. These small improvisations are generally made by individual operators and are not always centrally managed. And over time, these policy workarounds can mount, creating those security gaps. But with Clear ID, your customers define their standard security and compliance policies, and it takes care of the rest. Its workflow engine continuously updates access rights based on real-time identity attributes compared against the organizational policies. Any change to an attribute modifies existing access rights based on policy, eliminating the need for manual exceptions or ad hoc modifications. So as an individual's attributes evolves, so does their access. So in a manufacturing plant, the presence of specialist machinery and equipment means that safety is paramount and that compliance is top of mind. or in particular, ensuring only the right personnel can access set areas. But if a site-certified contractor calls in sick, why should finding a replacement throw timelines behind schedule? With just an access control system, a supervisor has the arduous task of sourcing a new contractor from scratch, then facilitating dialogue between an area manager and others to ensure that the contractor is fit to work. This typically involves time-consuming manual checks and requires a contractor to produce documents for verification. This process cuts into the time the contractor could be using to complete other pressing tasks, which invariably affects the project timelines. But with ClearID, the moment the supervisor learns his regular contractor is unable to work, he immediately revokes their access to the site and selects a replacement team member that meets the requirements to step in. The supervisor selects the time and location, inputs the reason behind why the access request is being made, and then hits send. A simple access request is placed to the area owner or the manager. As the authoritative source, the area owner accepts or rejects the access request. The supervisor and the contractor are made aware that access has been given because the necessary life and safety requirements have been met. Access is then provisioned in Synergis, and the contractor can use his access card to access the areas he needs to get the job done. And the entire process can be performed by a supervisor with a browser. No need for operator intervention. A day's work no longer needs to be lost through finding and verifying a substitute contractor. ClearID enables a certified replacement to be sourced efficiently, arrive on time, and begin immediately, which ensures the project maintains the momentum necessary. Note that ClearID is available through a web browser, whether that's on a mobile phone, tablet, or computer. Now, in a busy corporate office, managing visitors is a labor-intensive process from front desk staff. Manually taking information and conferring with hosts and area managers often proves time-consuming and inefficient, which leads to longer visitor wait times and increased administrative burden on personnel. Now, with ClearID, the process becomes smooth and seamless for visitors, hosts, and stakeholders. As soon as a meeting is arranged, the process begins. First, the hosts log into the ClearID over the browser on their PC, tablet, or mobile phone and creates a profile for her visitor, providing his name and contact details and the time of the meeting. Soon after the visitor receives an email invite from ClearID on behalf of the host's organization, he's asked to provide some additional information before he can gain access. This could be a driver's license, a license plate number, or any other piece of information that might be required by the host company's policies. This information is then run through a database check. Meanwhile, approval for the visit is sought from the host supervisor. In some cases, the building's facilities manager may even be informed. Once the necessary approvals are accepted, a visitor is created in Synergis and access is provisioned at the right time. In parallel, the visitor and host both receive confirmation emails for the upcoming appointment. Now, on the day of the meeting, the visitor arrives and scans the barcode he received in his confirmation email at either the kiosk or at the reception in the lobby. ClearID immediately emails the host, notifying them when the visitor's license plate is scanned at the front entrance or when that QR code is scanned at the reception office. The host now escorts her visitor to the conference room and they can get to work on schedule with no complications. So, how does this translate to your customers day to day, moving away from this manual approach to this automated approach to managing compliance? Your customers adopt a more thorough approach to managing access rights. Employees' onboarding is centralized and connected. Users are guided by policies and workflows, so there's less guesswork and greater automation as opposed to manually coordinating between different teams. The self-service model to make and manage requests means visitors and contractors are admitted more efficiently. Your customers further regulate access based on certifications and training so that security is consistent and up to date throughout the employee's tenure. And ultimately, customers improve the flow of people with fewer bottlenecks. Convenience can finally march in step with security. So far we've learned about identity and access management and why it is expected to grow in our industry. Now let's evaluate what the market is offering and how ClearID will help fit the market gap. So in speaking with customers and analysts, the problem with the current nature of physical identity and access management systems is that they are a humongous undertaking. Deployments often take, on average, 3 years or more because they need to be customized to each organization's unique needs. Because these systems link multiple access control systems together, it results in a combined system that is as strong as the weakest link. This is a shortfall with the current physical identity, with the current piece and layered approach to this segment. In terms of adoption, we haven't seen a mass market adoption yet because the current systems are very costly, and so they've been reserved for larger organizations with the capital required to procure, to deploy, and to install these complex systems. But we think that there's a better approach to this status quo. We think that ClearID is the closest to an off-the-shelf or out-of-the-box physical identity and access management system that doesn't require a tailored or customized deployment. That's because opposed to connecting to a multitude of different third-party access control systems, ClearID is unified with Synergis using 100% of native Synergis features and workflows. ClearID can be deployed faster and more easily than complex integrated systems because it's unified with Security Center Synergis. So rather than piecing together systems that were never designed to work together, ClearID is built to work natively with Synergis, therefore saving endless customization and system fine-tuning. Also, to help drive down the deployment times, Genetec ClearID is an as-a-service offering, meaning that you don't have to own, deploy, and maintain a physical identity and access management server with the operating system on the server and the software running on the server and the associated footprint. Lastly, offering ClearID as a service helps customers move towards GDPR compliance, as identities can be housed in the region they live. So a European citizen's personal identifiable information doesn't have to be housed in the US headquarters, it can be housed in the European data center. So naturally, you're probably wondering, who should you target with ClearID's offering when it comes available in the second half of 2018? We got some interest from many of our existing customers and had conversations with analysts. So from corporate offices and university campuses to highly regulated institutions in oil and gas, mining, and petrochemical industries, ClearID delivers a seamless transition away from day-to-day complexities of managing individual cardholders, their credentials, and their access rights, relying on automated workflows and self-service capabilities to manage the lifecycle of identities. They enable a more fluid, efficient working environment for everyone, from entry to exit. That said, strong interest is expected from rather regulated industries with a volume of employees, contractors, and visitors to manage. Typically, organizations start feeling the pain when they start to manage upwards of 1,000 identities. Multi-site customers need a way to manage to centralize their corporate policies and comply with regulations. So we think there'll be a great fit with higher educational institutions that manage a high volume of identities with evolving access rights. With government and healthcare are heavily regulated and typically spread out across a jurisdiction. We expect a high interest from transportation sector since it is heavily regulated and employs a high volume of contractors. We expect an interest from multi-site commercial buildings scattered around the globe because they face a challenge with centralizing their security policies. And lastly, we also expect a high interest in industrial sites like utilities in the energy sector because some of them have the strictest regulations. So let's go through each of these verticals one by one. So the education sector is relatively new target for physical identity and access management system providers. Schools, colleges, and universities have a strong background in physical electronic access control adoption, but recently there's also been an increasing demand for identity management in the sector because it can help schools stretch their IT budget by reducing the personnel needed to create and manage both students and teacher accounts. Physical identity and access management would allow physical access systems to pull user profiles from the district HR system for teachers and then for student information systems for students to generate access rights. This would greatly speed up access rights by provisioning and helping centralize access management. Now, since campuses are sometimes distributed within a city or country, linking educational establishments within the same district would give senior leaders multi-site credentials. Removing access rights when they leave their position would also be automated, further limiting any vulnerabilities. Additionally, streamlining visitor management through the system's tracking and auditing capabilities, access can be automated to meet requirements, and also integrating payment systems and library records to create stronger unified credentials for universities. Now, according to IHS Markit, the education sector with access control systems between 100 and 400 doors is expected to grow at a whopping 85% compound annual growth rate until 2021 globally. So for the system integrators out there that are currently working with customers in the education space that have already deployed Security Center Synergist with those customers, ClearID can be an excellent add-on to help them manage their compliance, for them to be a lot more efficient in their day-to-day operations. Now, the combined segments of government and healthcare sectors are areas of growth for identity and access management. The high priority that the sector places on security and the heavily regulated nature of their business operations make the workflow automation feature of identity and access management very attractive. Now, these physical identity and access management systems can link with HR and even patient records, which are updated frequently, meaning that they can be more flexible as well as more secure. Government office locations are typically spread out fairly evenly across a province or state, allowing for easy public access, of course, to access all ends of the province or state. This results in a large number of small premises that require management. Additionally, many employees may require access to multiple premises. Linking each site's access control system and managing access rights centrally allows these sites to vastly speed up provisioning and reduce potential vulnerabilities. Now, the healthcare sector in particular is subject to strict regulation of identity management due to the huge amount of sensitive data that it possesses. For example, in the United States, there are the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, known as HIPAA. This regulation, these address the requirements for compliance by health service providers. They include requirements and guidelines surrounding appropriate administrative, physical, and technical safeguards to ensure the confidentiality, the integrity, and the security of protected healthcare information, of PHI. So due to the complexity of operations, automating processes via a physical identity and access management system can provide huge efficiency gains. Again, according to IHS Markit, the government and healthcare sector with access control systems between 100 and 400 doors is expected to grow at 11.5% compound annual growth rate until 2021. These are global estimations. Transportation infrastructure projects were one of the earliest adopters of physical identity and access management solutions, largely due to the scale of their identity management needs. Physical identity and access management systems used in airports, for example, may have up to 100,000 identities under management at any given time. Geographically, demand for identity management integration from transportation projects is fairly evenly distributed across compared to other end user industries. So there's a large amount of contractor employment in this sector where physical identity and access management systems can manage these people's access rights much more safely and efficiently than traditional access control systems alone. Security is a high priority for this sector, and security systems face consistent scrutiny via frequent audits. Therefore, airports, ports, and metro access control installations can benefit greatly from tracking and auditing. Projects in this sector are typically much larger. As a result, managing utilization is more difficult and requires a larger amount of resources. So facility utilization and asset management features can help automate these tasks. Again, according to IHS Markit, the transportation sector with access control systems between 100 and 400 doors is expected to grow at 36% compound annual growth rate until 2021. Again, these are global numbers. The commercial sector possesses some of the best opportunities for physical identity and access management system due to the large amount of global enterprises. So office projects often already possess strong IT infrastructure, meaning they're equipped to take on a physical identity and access management system, and they also may have the experience with the logical identity and access management systems. They'll probably explore the crossroads between logical and physical identity and access management. Due to the nature of global commercial enterprises, there is a high probability of the enterprises possessing a network access control system. They may already resonate with the idea of centralizing their identities. And lastly, multi-site corporations need a way to standardize and codify their security policies, ensuring that remote offices are consistent with headquarters. Now, globally, the commercial sector with access control systems between 100 and 400 doors is expected to grow at 55% compound annual growth rate until 2021. So for your commercial accounts that already have deployed Security Center Synergist at all their sites, ClearID would be a great move forward. Finally, some of the strictest regulations for identity management exists in the utilities and energy sectors. These regulations require site owners to know who is on site at all times, which is accomplished by a regular access control system. Now, records must be kept for all visitors, and regulators will often conduct audits or request access reports to be submitted to verify the premises meets requirements. Now, physical identity and access management systems would make the process a lot more reliable and secure, as well as cheaper than the current method, which employs natural workers. Specifically, utility providers can be fined by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, also known as NERC, a U.S. regulator for failing to remove access rights from identities that are no longer associated with the company. If an employee has left the company, for example, NERC will semi-regularly conduct zip audits to verify access right records. Now, the maximum fine that NERC can impose is $100,000 US per incident. However, this is used only for overtly negligent providers. A physical identity and access management system can help facility managers avoid these hefty fines. Now, this sector also uses many contractors and therefore benefits from an identity and access management system's ability to manage access rights more efficiently than a traditional access control system. and the ability to transfer the responsibility for security management to the most relevant employee, like an area owner for a particular site without the need for administrative staff, is very beneficial to utility and energy and users with numerous remote locations. The ability to automatically find and email the relevant site manager and request permission for access rights is heavily sought for this feature. Now, this sector with access control systems between 100 and 400 doors is expected to grow at 31% compound annual growth rate until 2021. Again, these are global numbers. And a note that our interest earlier on for ClearID, for Genetec ClearID's investment into this specific category, did come from the industrial sector. So we're seeing a very strong following from the industrial sector for identity and access management. And as ClearID is not an available platform today, we encourage you to start conversations with your customers. And if our support is needed, please reach out directly to myself and to Stefan. Our emails are listed on the slide. We can help answer your commercial and technical questions until ClearID is generally available and then communicated to all channels. So that takes us to the end of Module 6, where we've covered this workflow-based approach to managing access, a great complement to customers that have already deployed Security Center Synergis and are wondering what is the next step. So this concludes our crash course. We thank you very much for making it through all of these 6 modules. Note again that today's recording will be made available after today's webinar. We'll talk briefly about the final exam that will be made available soon, but first I want to do a quick recap from modules 1 to 4. So in Module 1, we talked about common credential technologies. We stressed the relationship between card to reader, as cards must match the frequency of the reader. Later, we talked about card formats and CSN, the card serial number. We compared the differences between Prox credentials and smart cards. We also talked about biometrics and mobile credentials. Then we talked about securing the entire architecture and how to help customers spot card and reader vulnerabilities and guiding them towards a secure alternative. We also touched on card migration opportunities, options for migrating credentials, and best practices. As a review for Module 2, we kicked off the module talking about the role of controllers and IOs, and then walked through common controllers and interface modules that we integrate with. We then introduced the Synergis Cloud Link Appliance and talked about the value of a 3-tier distributed architecture as you're bringing more intelligence down to the edge for a more reliable system. We then continued the conversation around cybersecurity to discuss how cybercriminals can exploit a vulnerable credential, and then we proposed some guidelines to secure your customers' controllers. We then went through a comprehensive overview of different electronic locks that are supported by Synergis. We ended off with some hardware migration best practices. As a recap from Module 3, we kicked off the module talking about life and safety and the role that codes and standards play in your jurisdiction. Specifically in your recommendation of door hardware. We talked about fire protection associations and third-party conformity assessment bodies. We then moved to door hardware, starting off with how doors must adhere to code requirements. We then talked about different door locking options like electric strikes and mag locks. We then quickly covered request to exit devices and door contact sensors. We then ended off the module with other accessories that complement your customer's access control system. And finally, as a recap from Module 4, we started off walking through the basic components of an access control system, followed by more advanced uses. We effectively compared an integrated approach to a unified approach to security, and what that means for your end users, their operators, and their maintenance teams. We then walked through many of the Security Center add-ons that we offer to complement your customer Synergis system, like elevator control and building automation. Finally, we ended off with the notion of enabling your customers to buy from you by sizing up the cost of inaction. So, a bit on the final exam that will be made available from April 26 to May 11. It will be delivered by automated email. You'll receive a link to access the to access the final exam. Note that if you don't receive an email for any reason, maybe it's a bounced email from our program, you should visit our resources page. We've been pushing you towards this resources page that includes all of our content and material for a crash course, including the video recordings. The final exam will simply be made available on that very resources page. So again, if you don't receive that email from us, please feel free to go to the resources page yourself and take the exam when you're ready. Note that you will have 120 minutes to complete the exam in one sitting, and you'll only have one opportunity to write the exams. Note that retakes are possible, but only upon request. If you're not able to write the exam between April 26th and May 11th, please reach out directly to me by responding to one of the automated emails that has gone out to you. The reply of those specific emails are usually funneled back up to me. Also note that your grade will be issued immediately after the exam is submitted. For participants that score 80% or greater on the final exam, you'll be granted a certificate immediately after the exam is submitted. So because it was requested, and we're looking at some of the information that you've provided through the survey that's available on our resources page, some participants wanted to actually get a practice quiz. So making that practice quiz here available today just to gauge your level of understanding and how much you should study for this crash course. So the first question here in the practice quiz is, which of the following is not an advantage that OSDP version 2 has over Wiegand? Your options being bidirectional, secure, one directional, or a higher throughput. I'll give you a few seconds to think through that. Which of the following is not an advantage that OSDP version 2 has over Wiegand? Feel free to use the question dialog box to submit your answer if you'd like. And the answer is one directional. One directional is not an advantage that OSDP has over Wiegand. Of course, the advantages that OSDP 2 has over Wiegand is that it's bidirectional and that it's secured with AES 128-bit encryption and that it offers significantly higher throughput. Next question, which of the following is the card platform with the capability of being the most secure credential technology from the list offered? So we have Magstripe cards, 13.56 megahertz smart cards, 13.56 kilohertz smart cards, or 125 kilohertz proximity cards. Giving you a couple of seconds to think through that. Answer being 13.56 megahertz smart card technology. Note again that not all smart cards are offer the same level of security, and Genetec, at Genetec we do have our recommendation on in terms of specific classes of smart cards. Next question, what does a card format do? Does it interpret the card info and pushes it to the controller? Does it energize the card through resonant energy transfer? Does it manage the leading and trailing parity bits? Or does it describe how the data on the card is organized? Answer being, it describes how the data on the card is organized. It's almost like a phone number, knowing what the area code is, followed by the actual phone number. You have the country code. Describing how that data is organized makes more sense of the data on the card. And lastly, if you're guiding your customers to secure their IP controllers, which of the following is the least helpful piece of advice that you'd give to them? Option A being ensuring controllers are enclosed in a secure and hidden part of the building, disconnecting the controller from the network to avoid man-in-the-middle attacks, ensuring the latest firmware is always running on board, and ensuring default passwords have been changed. So again, you're guiding customers to secure their controllers. Which of the following is the least helpful advice? So all of them are very helpful except for one. And the response to that is to disconnect the controller from the network to avoid man-in-the-middle attacks. Of course, if you're disconnecting the controller from the network, you lose all communications, and in certain cases, you're also losing power if they're PoE controllers. So it is not a good recommendation to avoid man-in-the-middle attacks. But of course, ensuring that they're enclosed and hidden, ensuring the latest firmware is running, and ensuring that passwords have been changed and that the access control system is segregated are all great pieces of advice. So with that said, I'd like to conclude our crash course, and specifically to respond to any questions that you've had from modules 1 to 6, specifically focusing on module 6, I'd like to take you into our question and answer period. I remind you, if you do have any questions, please use the question dialog box located at the right-hand side of your screen to submit your questions. Stefan and myself will have a quick review of these questions as they come in. We'll go on mute for a couple of minutes and then come back to summarize the questions that we've answered. Thank you.